Good afternoon, everybody. We're just letting people in from the waiting room. So if you just bear with us for about 30 seconds, and then we'll be getting underway with this afternoon's webinar. There's quite a lot of you joining us, so it'll just take a brief moment for us to get everyone signed in and across to this screen. So just bear with us. We'll be with you shortly. For those of you just joining, we are just letting people in from the waiting room. We'll be getting going in a few moments' time. There's just quite a lot of you who've signed up for this webinar. So we just want to make sure that everyone gets through from the waiting room before we start sharing the information with you. So we'll be with you as quickly as we can. Okay, we'll get going and I'll just explain the format of today's session just while people are coming in from the waiting room, and then we'll be getting started with the main information. My name's James, I'm from London Funders, and I'm joined by my colleague Geraldine Blake on the screen you can see as well. We're going to be talking you through in a moment's time some of the details about the latest round of funding from the London Community Response. Just to let you know that because there's quite a lot of you joining us for today's call, we're doing this in webinar format. That means you can see both of us. We can't see you, but we can see if you pop questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. So if there's anything you're not sure about as we go through, do pop a question in the Q&A box. Some of those we'll be able to get to at the end of today's session. Others of those, just because of time, we'll collate and we'll produce into an FAQs document that we make available after this recording to make sure that we get as many answers to you as we can and as quickly as we can. There's also the chat box at the bottom of the screen that you can use if you want to introduce yourself to each other or if there are any resources that you want to share. Just because of the volume of you on the call, we won't be able to keep an eye on that chat box. So if it is a question for us, just make sure you're popping it in the Q&A box, please. So today we're going to be talking you through the London Community Response, the latest wave of funding, and just putting that in the context of what's gone before. We're conscious there's a lot of people who won't be able to join today's webinar, so we're also recording this and we'll be making it available on the London Funders YouTube channel. That'll also be where we'll be able to put captions on as well. So if you need this in a subtitle format, that'll be available on our YouTube channel as soon as we can after today's session. To talk you through what's going on with the next wave of funding, I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the slides that we'll talk you through. Hopefully you can now see a screen that says London Community Response and today's date. And helpfully at the bottom of that, it's also got our Twitter handle. So if you want to be kept up to date with all the latest information about funding available through the London Community Response, but also any news from our wider network of funders, do make sure you're following us on Twitter as well. What we're going to be covering today is just a very quick introduction to London Funders for those of you who don't know us so well. We're going to talk a little bit about funder flexibility during this crisis, just to make sure that the funding we're talking about today is located in an awareness of everything else that's going on in the funding community. And then we're going to get into the detail of the London Community Response, both telling you about what's happened in recent waves of funding, but most importantly, telling you about the wave of funding that's launching tomorrow in terms of the priorities and the process for that funding and how you can go about applying. Hopefully there'll be a little bit of time at the end where we can deal with any questions that you've put in the Q&A box. But if there isn't time for that today, what we'll be doing is we're collating those and putting those in an FAQ document that we'll then put on the London Community Response website so you can make sure that you've got the answers to the questions that you've raised with us. So to start with, a quick introduction to London Funders. For those of you who don't know us so well, we're the membership network for funders across London civil society. So that's 170 organisations from the public, private and independent sectors. And our job is to work with those funders to try and make sure that the work that we're doing collectively is as effective as we can be at enabling people across London's communities to live better lives. So the London Community Response is one of the things that we do, but there's a wider programme of activities and resources available on the London Funders website for you as well. One of the things we did at the start of the crisis back in March last year was launch the We Stand With The Sector statement. And one of the things
has James frozen? He'll come back in a second. Here he is.
My apologies. The joys of doing these things when you are relying on internet connections. I was just telling you about some of the work that we did at the start of the crisis with the We Stand With The Sector statements. There's over 400 funders who have signed up there about adapting activities, being flexible about how that funding is used. And we also released a sister statement to that in November last year, which has got organisations signed up to it about renewing those commitments, but also giving new ones about listening to you and being with you for the long term. So you can see the list of all the funders who signed up to that on the COVID-19 funders website. And one of the things we encourage you to do in the guidance for the London community response is just to check against that list, because it might be that you can have a conversation with one of your current funders about adapting some of the grants you have in place to make sure that you can deliver the work that you want to do. It won't necessarily always be about applying for new funding. So do have those conversations if you haven't already. What we're going to talk to you about today, though, is about the London Community Response, and you can find all the information that we're going to share with you today on the London Community Response website. The guidance that we're going to talk you through will be published tomorrow. So at the moment, we're giving you sort of an early preview of what's going to be published about the new wave of funding. The story so far, to put it into context, is that this is a single application portal where you can put in your applications that are then seen by 67 funders in the background. This has been going since 4 days after the first lockdown back in last March. And since then, we've gone through 4 waves of funding, the most recent one just closing just before Christmas, looking at some crisis grants over the winter period. Through that period, just over 8,500 applications have been received, asking for just over £150 million worth of funding, and £46 million has gone out in grants through just over 3,000 organisations across the capital. What you'll be able to see on the London Community Response website is detail about where all those grants have gone, and to give you the context of how many applications we got in, what the success rates were, so on and so forth. You'll also be able to see data like this that shows you which themes were supported by funders in the partnership, to give you a sense of where that money's gone across the capital. Really importantly, the wave of funding that we're going to be talking to you about today is, we expect, going to be very oversubscribed and have a high level of competition for that funding. So we'd really encourage you to look at that data to get an understanding of whether this is the right funding programme for you, and to really read the guidance that's going to be made available as clearly as you can. Try to make sure that we're answering the questions that you have about how you can make sure that you are applying to the right funding. There's going to be links on the website as well to make sure that if you want to find out about other sources of funding, you've got links out to other groups as well that you can apply to. The wave of funding that we're going to be launching tomorrow is the 5th wave of funding. So far across the partnership, there's £10 million that's pledged to be distributed through this wave. That's going to be split between 2 different programmes. The first of these is crisis response, and these are small grants up to £10,000 for urgent needs of communities over the next 6 months. Because of the very urgent nature of some of those needs, this one has a very tight timeline, which is why we're doing this webinar today, to make sure you've got this information ahead of the launch tomorrow. Because the deadline for the crisis response grants is in a week's time, 5 p.m. on Thursday, the 21st of January. Because it's a quite tight timeline for you to get applications in, it's also quite a tight timeline for funders to be able to get decisions out to you. So they'll be letting you know by mid-February the outcome of any applications you make through that programme. You'll also be able to apply for a renewal grant, which is the bulk of this programme that's available this time. These are grants of up to £50,000, and they're more focused on the renewal and recovery work, and they're 1-year grants for the next financial year. There's a longer deadline for these. You've got until the 15th of February at midday to get your applications in. And the ambition is to make sure these decisions are in place for funding to be with you from April onwards. All of this is going to be published on the London Community Response website late tomorrow afternoon. The priorities this wave will be similar as you'll have seen in previous waves of funding. So equity and inclusion, making sure that the grants are going to organisations that are led by and for the communities most affected by this crisis. Groups that have a strong connection into the communities that are most affected, to make sure we're working with people who've got established reach and established relationships of trust with communities. And there'll be a priority for smaller organisations, so typically those with a turnover of under £1 million a year. It won't be the case that all of the grants go to these three groups, as you'll see from the data on the website from previous waves. So it might be you're a larger organisation who is led by your community, and you'll be able to put an application in as well. But I'd encourage you to have a look at the data just to get a sense of how those priorities have been applied in previous waves. Within this wave, there's going to be 2 different types of funding that you can apply for. The first one is project or activity grants, which are available both for the crisis response and for renewal grants. And these are where you'll be able to apply for specific costs associated with the work that you're doing. If you're applying for a renewal grant, you'll also be able to put in for a core costs grant rather than a project or activity costs grant if this is what's better for you. And this is where you'll be able to apply for the contribution to the cost of developing or growing your organisation, where your work links very closely to the ambitions of the programme. There's a slightly different budget format for each of those, and there's extra guidance that will be made available on the website to make sure that you're applying for the right one of those two, depending on what's right for your organisation. The list of organisations who are eligible to apply are on the screen for you here. If you're not on that list or you don't meet some of the eligibility criteria, you'll also be able to potentially apply through a host organisation. And again, there's going to be more guidance on the website tomorrow that explains how that process works and what kind of organisations might be considered by that. Importantly, the work would still need to meet the main requirements of the programme in terms of being charitable, reaching Londoners, and so on. On eligibility, some of the organisations on that list will have a cap on the amount of money that we're able to offer in grants, and they'll be indicated on the guidance that's published tomorrow. So there will be a maximum for some types of organisation for up to £10,000 rather than the £50,000 limit. All the work you're applying for must be legally charitable. It must benefit Londoners. So if you are an organisation that covers a geography bigger than London, we'll really be looking to make sure you're focusing in and telling us how that work benefits Londoners in the detail of your application. We can't make any grants to individuals. There's a link out to other sources of support for that. Importantly, if you've had an application successful in previous waves and you've had a grant, for waves 1, 2, 3, that doesn't matter. You can apply for any of the grants available in this programme. If you did have a crisis grant in wave 4, because that only closed in December, we can't accept you for another application for crisis grants this time, but you can apply for a renewal grant. So just to give you a bit more detail about the two different programmes, and then my colleague Geraldine will take you through more of the details about how to apply. So the crisis response grants, firstly, these are grants for up to £10,000, and you'll be able to apply for project and activity costs linked to that work. Through this programme, we're expecting to make about 70 grants available across London. It's a very tight timeline. The applications need to be in by 5 o'clock, Thursday, 21st of January, so in a week's time. As the applications are being received, they will be being assessed as we go, so that all the people get their decisions by mid-February. As soon as the grant is awarded, you'll be able to start work on that and get on with it straight away, and that funding can be up to 6 months worth of your work related to crisis. The 4 things that we're looking to fund under crisis response, firstly is around access to food, secondly is around provision of essentials, thirdly is around mental health, well-being and tackling isolation and loneliness. And the 4th one is supporting people affected by domestic abuse or violence. You'll need to make sure for a crisis response grant that your work relates to one of those 4 areas before you put that application in. The second part of the programme are the renewal grants, and this is the bigger part of the programme, where grants are up to £50,000 available, and you can apply for either project costs or core costs. So one renewal grant application can be submitted per organisation for either project or core. Through this programme, we're expecting to make about 190 grants across London. You've got a bit longer to put the applications in for this one. The deadline is 12 o'clock on Monday, the 15th of February. Assessments will be made as quickly as we can after that date. So you'll get your decisions into April 2021 so that money can start then, and it will cover you for that 2021-22 financial year. Because we're looking to try and move away from response, recognising that civil society is really critical to what's happening at the moment to support communities, but will also be critical as we move away from this crisis and start to rebuild and renew our communities, this grant is meant to help sustain some of your work beyond this crisis period. We've linked this funding into 3 of the missions of the London Recovery Board. They're building strong communities, New Deal for young people, and a robust safety net. If you go on the Greater London Authority website, you'll be able to find a bit more detail about the London Recovery Board and the wider context for those missions. But I'm just going to talk you through what some of the priorities are that we're looking to fund under each of those. So firstly, under building strong communities. Now, this is an overall ambition that Londoners are able to play an active role in their communities and that London is a more equal and inclusive city after COVID-19. So the 5 things that we'll be looking to fund under the Building Strong Communities strand are community hubs so that people can develop community networks, get support and be active in their communities. Work that helps to amplify the voices of Londoners who might not be heard to help bring about change. advocacy work linked to poverty and inequality that's been highlighted through the crisis, capacity building and development support for civil society groups around volunteering, around voice of Londoners, around leadership, and to help people be more sustainable for the future. And finally, work that helps to build feelings of belonging and decreases loneliness and isolation. The second of the themes is the New Deal for young people. And this is one where trying to make sure that through the work of the mission, this next generation of young people have access to services that improve their mental and physical well-being, that increase their access to education and job prospects, and help make sure we reduce inequality and create a fairer and more equal London. Some of the things we're particularly looking to fund through the New Deal for young people are about work that centres the voices of young people to help shape the future of our city, work with youth centres to make sure that they're retained and continue to provide safe spaces as we move into recovery, and mentoring schemes and tailored support that focus on young people facing the greatest barriers to realising their potential. The third theme is the robust safety net. This is one which is recognising that there's been a number of challenges facing our city through the crisis, and there will continue to be into the future. So hopefully that all Londoners can be supported to be lifted out of or avoid poverty or relieve hardship. So under this priority, we're looking to fund increased access to advice services across the range of social welfare law areas, and also continued crisis support, for example, food. Work that helps to develop partnerships that put services to provide a robust safety net alongside other services. So for example, advice in community settings, health settings, and schools. And also work that will prevent increases in homelessness and addresses rough sleeping. We're now going to move on to look at some of the details of how to apply for the grants, whether you're applying under the crisis or the renewal programmes. And my colleague Geraldine will just talk you through some of the detail of this.
Thank you, James. So if you've applied before, the process will be very familiar to you. If you haven't applied before, you're very, very welcome to make an application. So you go to the London Community Response website, and there will you click on apply, and there will be a few pre-application questions this time, just to make sure that you are eligible for a grant. But when you've answered those, that will take you straight through to the application form. And the first thing it asks you is what kind of application are you making? So is this a crisis? Is it an application for a crisis grant or a renewal grant? And if it's a renewal grant, is it a project grant or a core grant? And depending on what you tick there, you will slightly different set of questions will pop up. So they're mainly the same questions for all of them, but there are some slight differences. So obviously for the longer renewal grants, there's slightly more detail asked for, and some of the questions about core and project are slightly different. So read the guidance really carefully and decide what kind of grant you want to be making an application for. And as James said earlier on, you can apply for both a crisis and a renewal grant, but you can only apply for one renewal grant. And each organisation can only apply for one crisis and one renewal grant. And what happens with duplicates is, if you're making more than one application, we just pick them up as they come through, and they're not eligible. So it's a waste of your time to make more than one application. And as James also said before, you can apply if you've had a previous grant from us. Have a look at you can also, at the top of the application form, you can download a Word document, which is the whole application form, which will tell you, so you can have a look in advance at everything you're going to have to answer. You can use that to draft your questions, your answers, if you like. There might be 2 or 3 of you filling in an application form and you need to share it between you. And that will also tell you about all of the things that you're going to have to upload, all of the other documents that you're going to have to upload before you submit your report, so that you can make sure that you're ready to apply. You've got everything you need in place and you know the kinds of things you're going to be asked. Okay, so starting with the core costs, because this is the really new bit, and this is in response to lots and lots of organisations telling us how important core costs are to them and how rare, we know how rare core grants are. So these are, a core grant is not tied to any one project. It's about supporting your organisation as a whole, you know, supporting the posts that keep your organisation running, you know, your general costs, your development costs. It might be, in this case, there's a question in the box, it might be about something you need to do to your building. So it's the kind of core costs of running your organisation. So you might be applying, for example, for a chief executive post, or the admin posts that sometimes don't get covered by project grants. You might be applying for you know, the work that you want to do about developing partnerships, thinking about your impact, those kinds of things. So that's what you can use a core grant for, and you can just tell us in the application form exactly what you want. If you're applying for a project grant, this is, if you've applied before, this will be a very familiar list to you. So you can ask for everything that relates to that project, you know, so that's the people to run it, it's the support that you need to give those people so that they can carry on running it, it's any equipment you need or software or training or anything like that. Next slide. It's also anything you need that helps people to access that project. So it might be interpretation services, it might be, you know, we know that the digital needs, there are still big digital needs out there in terms of people being able to access services online. You can also ask us for some of your core costs in a project grant. So you know the overheads of running the actual project. So that's a contribution towards you know, the costs of your organisation. It might be about the partnerships that you need to develop to make sure that project is effective. It might be about the development that your organisation wants to do alongside that. So there's been some questions in the box about what about if we want both project and core. I would say just make a decision about where the kind of balance of that sits. So if it's mainly project with some core on, I'd go for a project grant. If it's mainly core, but actually as part of that core, you're going to be developing some projects, I'd go for a core grant. What we can't fund, and James has already covered this, is direct payments, direct cash payments to beneficiaries. So we can't give you money to give money out. We also can't cover things like, you know, for schools to provide laptops to pupils, because that should be covered by public funding. And we can't cover work that doesn't happen in London or isn't charitable. And if you have questions about what charitable means, have a look at the Charity Commission website. We mean the things that are covered by the Charity Commission. So my tips are download the Word version first and have a look at what you're going to need to answer and what you're going to need to provide. Read the guidance really carefully. Read the frequently asked questions document, which is also on the website, and we update that regularly depending on how many, you know, what we're getting asked about. So hopefully you should be able to find all your answers in there. I would say that there's two questions in there. One is about question 29, which is 50 words to describe what you're requesting. And when we put all of these applications in front of funders, I mean, obviously they can see everything, but that's the first bit they look at. The first thing they look at is those 50 words. So get that right if you can. And then there's a box underneath where you get 300 words to really go into the detail of what it is you want to do, who you are, why you, how this fits with other things that are going on, you know, why you're the right organisation to do this kind of work. And we have in previous rounds, we do ask for a number of things to be uploaded. You know, your constitution, your financial, your accounts, if your safeguarding policy, if you work directly with service users, if you're working with young people, there are some additional things you need to attach. If you're asking for a bigger grant, you're going to need to attach a budget. In previous rounds, a proportion of applications have submitted without their attachments. And sometimes we have time to chase them and sometimes we don't. And actually what we've seen is that most organisations do have those attachments. When we chase them, they provide them for us. But just bearing in mind that the competition in this round is, there are going to be fewer grants, the competition is higher, and certainly for the crisis response grants, there isn't going to be time for us to chase. So make sure you've got those attachments uploaded before you submit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Geraldine, very helpful. I just wanted to close by also just giving you a reminder about that this isn't the only sort of show in town. We're conscious from the feedback that you've given us and that you've given through the London Community Response Survey, concerns about where funding is going longer term. So we produced a bit of research in December that was published on the London Funders website called After the Storm, that features interviews and surveys from different funders across London's funding community to give an indication of where they think funding is going in the future. So for some context and for some wider reading, we'd recommend having a look at that. We're going to carry on working with the partnership to look at future waves of funding as well, and we'll let you know about those in due course. And to help inform those, it's really important, if you can, to take part in things like the London Community Response Survey that the Greater London Authority coordinates. And there's the link on the screen there to get involved if you're not already. There's some useful resources that we hope you'll be able to access. So for example, our website, the London Funders website, includes links to lots of other funders and has access to our newsletter as well, where we produce updates about what's going on in funding in London. The London Community Response website, late tomorrow afternoon, will have all of this guidance on it and the application form ready for you to start completing. We'll be tweeting about that on the London Funders handle, so make sure you're following us on there. And if you do have individual questions that we've not been able to answer on today's call, you'll be able to get those through the info@londonfunders.org.uk email address. I'll leave that on screen just for a second so you can make sure you've got time to jot any of those down if you need to. And we'll quickly just try and answer a few of the questions that you've put in the chat. We'll do these in a general sense. If there are particular ones that we've not been able to answer, we'll cover those either through the FAQs document, and when you have a look at that, if we still haven't answered it, do drop us a line so that we can get back to you. Several of you have asked whether you can apply if you've received funding from us in the past, and the answer to that is yes. So this is effectively a new wave of funding, and as with previous waves, it starts with a clean sheet. So some of you who've had funding in the past may well get funding again in this round. Some of you who had declined in previous rounds will be eligible again to get funding. The only time that's not the case is if you were declined because you were not eligible to apply in a previous wave. So if that's the case, we're asking you to just drop us a line before you submit an application, because eligibility is a bar that would mean you wouldn't get through to the funders in the first place. Some of you have asked about whether, although the financial year that's covered by the renewal grants is 21-22, so from April, if you've got a different financial year, can you still apply? You can. The grant period is 1 year from the start of April. Some of you have asked about whether you can apply for less than the total amount. You absolutely can, and in previous waves, as you'll be able to see from the data report, many people did apply for less funding than the total, and those grants were given out. And you can see the full list of grants on the website. Several of you have asked about whether it's worth applying if you're rejected in previous waves. And I think the thing we'd encourage you to do there is read the guidance this time and check if your work and your organisation fits with what we're looking to fund, because those are the criteria that funders are going to be using to make their assessments and make their decisions. So do check out on that. A few of you querying whether you can apply for both the crisis response and the renewal grants. Yes, you can. The only people who are not able to do that are if you had a wave 4 crisis grant from us, in which case you can only apply for the renewal grant. But everyone else, you can apply for a crisis response and or a renewal grant if you wish to. Some of you have asked whether the PowerPoint slides are going to be available after the call. The short version of that is no, because we're going to make this available as a YouTube video so that you get the slides available to play back together with the context that we've given verbally to this, and that will also be closed captioned for accessibility. And the detail of all of this guidance is what's going to be produced on the website tomorrow, so that you can see the detail about what you need to apply against in each case. Some of you have asked if we can confirm who the funders are behind the partnership. That's all publicly available on the London Community Response website. So the names and the logos of all of the funders are listed on there as well. And finally, some of you have asked about size of organisation, or whether if you don't quite fit all of the priority categories that we have on the website there, whether you should still apply. And again, that's a judgment for you, but there are, as you'll see from the data report, organisations who are larger than £1 million who've been funded, but perhaps were very focused on a particular community or led by that community. So it's not that you necessarily have to have all of those things in order to apply, but a significant proportion of the grants went to organisations that did. But that data report will help you to do that. I know Geraldine's been looking at the questions as well, and may have a few that she wants to just pick up and respond to, or give us a bit of extra information before we close.
Just one very, very quick thing. If you applied for a Wave 4 grant and you haven't heard from us, the first thing to do is to check your junk inbox to make sure that the email hasn't gone to the wrong place. You should have heard from us by now. Would you drop us a line at info@londonfunders.org.uk if you haven't, and we'll let you know what's happened. And we'll be publishing the full grants list for Wave 4 grants next week.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Geraldine. And thank you everybody for joining us. We hope that's been a helpful snapshot of everything that we're going to be launching tomorrow. All of that guidance will be on the London Community Response website by the end of the day tomorrow, together with the application form so that you can apply. We'll be announcing that on Twitter as soon as that's gone live, so you can see it. We hope being able to see that information in advance just helps you get your minds ready in terms of what you want to apply for, so you can be ready to fill in those application forms, bearing in mind that Crisis has that very early deadline of just next week to get those in, but you have slightly longer on the renewal grants. So all of that information will be on the London Community Response website tomorrow. Later on this afternoon, this recording will be on our YouTube channel together with the slides and the closed caption, so you can share that and hopefully in an accessible format. If you do need this information in formats that we haven't made available, do drop us a line to the info@londonfunders.org.uk website email address, so that we can make sure we get that sent over to you. I think the short summary from us is that everyone in the London Funders team and across the London funding community has been incredibly impressed with everything that civil society has done. The last year has been incredible. It's been exhausting, it's been distressing, we've experienced loss. We've also experienced great happiness and joy as we've seen people come together in their communities and really take action to try and improve the lives of ourselves and others. Thank you for everything that you're doing. I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to fund every single one of you through this funding wave, and it will be a competitive process, but know that we value everything that you do. We're very grateful for what you do for our city, and we look forward to receiving your applications and to funding as many of them as we can. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.